Welcome to Season 5 of the Photoethics Podcast. I'm your host, Savannah Dodd, and I'm the founder of the Photography Ethics Center. Each week, I'll be talking with an accomplished photographer about the ethics of their practice. Today, in episode number 9, we'll be talking with Mohamed Mahdy about embedding ethics. Mohamed is a visual storyteller from Alexandria, Egypt. His work concentrates on the hidden and often unseen communities in Egypt, tackling diverse cultural and social issues. He works with his protagonists as a collective to empower them, amplifying their voices and creating a tangible impact on the ground. He aims to go beyond his own perspective to get closer to reality by exploring how collective memory is shaped and transformed. Mohamed's award-winning work has been exhibited worldwide. In 2021, he was awarded the Photography and Social Justice Fellowship with Magnum Foundation. In 2022, he was named by The Guardian as one of the 5 emerging talents in photojournalism, and he won the Canon Student Development Program. In 2023, Mohamed was awarded both regional and global awards from the World Press Photo Foundation for his interactive web documentary, Here the Doors Don't Know Me. He holds a degree in arts and design from Pharos University in Alexandria. Could we start with you just telling us a little bit about the kind of work that you do?
All right. So I think my life has taken me into doing documentary work. I started as a street photographer, which was magnificent because it allowed me to enter many houses, different social classes. And then I found a meaning in that, which led me later to do more of long-term projects, because sometimes being in a place temporarily is not satisfying, and you feel like you are not attached to people or the environment, and you're always like an outsider. So I think it took me to make more long-term projects, and it got me also like to think about the meanings behind every story I'm working on, which I started to be interested in, like stories about social justice, social issues, environmental changes, as well as, our culture, identity, and the collective identity, and conscious and memory, and all of these topics, which I feel it's very important to me, actually. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that idea of time is really interesting. And it comes up so often in the podcast, this idea of, the differences between working on short-term projects or street photography or, quick turnaround editorial work, and then working on these like longer-term documentary projects. How do you sort of navigate longer-term projects? How do you get access into a community? And how do you negotiate yourself in that space?
I think it's all started with I'm looking always what surrounds me. Like I don't need to travel to the end of my country to make a story, but I always see like what surrounds me. And sometimes I feel like the stories is calling me. Like I'm asking my friend and he's telling me about his family, and then an issue appeared and I was like, what? I need to know more about that. And this is usually how it started, because I feel, again, like when the story chooses me, I feel like I'm here for a reason, like I'm in that place for a reason. And if I do really care about people, if I really do care about the field and what I'm doing, so you feel responsibility. And again, I'm always telling myself why I should travel outside Egypt to do a documentary project, because they need me here. Like there is an issue everywhere in each corner. It's not only about issues, but it's also about important documents or stories that you need to show to others that no one will have time to come and see it. So yeah, so this is how usually it starts. And I think time is playing a crucial role, because my practice is always about immersing myself. I think I used to say like, I will not be honest, or I will not be an honest man if I just went and all I do care about is the image, because again, like it feels like you are using people somehow. And I think at some point in my life, we used to hear these words a lot, that we are dealing with subjects. And I was like, no, they are not just subjects. They are protagonists. They are the heroes of our stories. And without them, we are not exist in this field. So thinking about that, you feel like how you're making a friendship with someone or with a place. You use all of your senses, you invest in them, and later magic happens. So I feel like time is crucial because you do not want to force anything to happen. So when I go to a place, usually like some people is easy, like, they are open to anything and of course they help you. But then I feel like it's also important they get to know me. Because as long as I see them, they also see me, and I'm not an angel or anything, but they have also to have an opinion about me. They have to be aware of everything I'm doing. And sometimes these interactions, which I call it like it's normal interactions, like you use all of your senses, like you smell, you touch, you hear, and this is how you make information goes inside your body or your brain. And I feel this is how you're going to express a story or create a story. Because if you didn't really immerse yourself or invest in people's around, I think it's not going to be honest. It's just going to be a shallow story. And then magic happen, from immersing yourself. When you live your daily life, you witness a lot of different moments. That's why I feel like I'm against the photograph a little bit, because again, you freeze a moment out of many other moments. But when you live, when you immerse, you get a chance to see all of these different moments, which you get a sense of how they live, how their practices is, and all of that is important. I feel honestly, like when I'm creating a narrative, it adds a lot of layers that important. Yeah.
I think that's really interesting, especially what you're describing about sort of using all of your senses, because of course we think of photography as being such a visual, highly, highly visual practice, but you're talking about the sort of embodied experience of being a photographer in this space. And I think that's really interesting. And it makes me think also of the project that you won an award for through World Press Photo, because that was very, multimodal, wasn't it? Like that included a lot of other elements. Would you maybe talk about how did you come to that? And why is it that these other things are necessary to tell the story, and why photography maybe wasn't enough for that story?
Because when I started the last project, Here the Doors Do Not Know Me, it was in 2016. And again, I started as a documentary photographer who wants to document like a fishing village is about to be demolished and displaced from the entire map. And you feel responsibility that these photographs will document and images that will maybe in the history will be important about our culture, identity. But after 4 years, I was documenting these houses and people's stories. I met one of the fishermen and he told me something that changed the whole project. He said, we as fishermen, we used to receive letters in bottles in the old days. And when I started to do my research, usually it's a love letter, or someone last words, or, when someone in a war and dies at the sea, like he writes something, and he throws it because he thinks that someone will get it and remember their life. And I felt like why we are narrating the stories usually from one side, because even when you talk with people, sometimes there is a difference in power dynamic. You see and you choose the angle and you choose the photograph based on your education, what's in the back of your mind. But I felt like I need to change that somehow. And it started with giving them a blank papers and asking them, this is your last letter, to write whatever you want. And then when I was collecting those letters, it was magnificent. It was even more even than what I was doing. And I mean, in terms of authenticity, like you find a woman writing about her daughter, you find someone writing about his son, you find like someone writing about a tree she planted in front of her house, or different kind of memories and scenarios. And I was like, okay, so I started to ask them, how do you want to be represented? How do you want others to see you and look at you? So everyone was choosing his moment, People were giving me ideas like, I want to be photographed where my brother has died. I want to be photographed with my family. Or no, don't photograph me, but just photograph my house. It's everything to me. And all of these different things, I felt like it's different like memories, and all together it shaped a kind of a collective memory, which is beyond what I was doing. And I felt like photograph is also temporary, It's just a moment. Maybe people after 30 or 50 years are going to look at it like we look at the archive photographs now and I feel like nostalgia. Oh, wow, I want to live in the past. It was so... No, it's not really the reality or the full truth. So I felt like engaging with the community, making them a kind of like an agency, empowering them, there is more authenticity. And I felt it's not just about me. And I feel like I'm always running from that practices. Like I don't want to be just about me. I'm just here in between. I'm just connecting people. I'm just, like a circle, but there is a lot of things beyond what I'm doing. And then families started to donate their family archives. So when you investigate that, you find the new layers. but actually the sound of the city is it's magnificent. So again, the sound is giving different layers. And when you study NLP or body language, you will see like there is different amount of information, like from visuals and sound and all of these things. So sometimes we look at the photograph, but we cannot listen to a sound. And maybe you think it's a quiet area, but actually no, like when you are there with your body and sense it, no, it's not quiet, for example. So you get a sense about the feelings that you might get when you are in the space. That's why like I was always thinking about multimedia as this could be the future of photojournalism or visual narratives, because with now what we witness in news and what's written, you know, sometimes you cannot believe everything you see. It just like, at the end of the day, it's humans are creating that. So it could be anything. So yeah, I feel like there is more authenticity in multimedia because it has all of these different layers.
I think you described that so beautifully. That's really interesting. And I think as well, you know, what you were talking about, how you don't want it to just be your perspective. I think that's really powerful because I think that that's something that has not really been modeled to us by sort of the photojournalists that we've seen before. A lot of that is very ego-driven, or I shouldn't say ego-driven. There's a lot of ego in it. There's a lot of ego in photography of being the photographer and the person. And I think it sounds like you're really distancing yourself from that narrative. And I guess I want to know, how did you develop your own ethical perspective on these things? You know, like what tools did you use, or who did you talk to, or did you was it just intuitive?
I think you described it perfectly when you said ego, because ego, it's within us in everything. It's not just photography, but we take a picture and we call it mine. It's my picture, you know, my scene. And no, it's not yours. You know, you just took this frame out of 360 degree. But when you reflect a little bit about yourself, you will find that you took that frame out of many other possibilities because there was something drive you to make it. And these things, usually it's in the back of our mind, like our conscious, our education, you know, the environment we grew up in, whatever back there, maybe your ethics, your morals, your values, you know, your principles, whatever we call it, but it's all there. And I think when we reflect about it, I think the most important thing is we don't separate who we are from what we do. You know, like, and if, for example, if I'm reflecting about who am I, and I found that I have that ego, you know, and then you ask yourself, it's not your pictures, and you don't own people, and you don't own anything actually in reality, but you should be ethical in your practices. And then you find a development with this just conversation with yourself. And I think I always had it because I'm always afraid that maybe after some years I'm going to regret making these images, because sometimes you ask yourself, how people going to use my stories? Is this the reality? Like, maybe people doesn't know what's inside me, but I know it. Like, I live with it. I'm going to sleep with it. So I know the reality because I have been there. I have witnessed all of this information. What I show and what I hide is a big responsibility. And I feel our field is very sensitive, like in that matter. And we should have these morals and values. And I'm always talking with myself. Actually, if I work on a new project now, I had the same question. It's not like it changed with time. No, it's always like having that fear of why I'm doing that. For whom? Am I creating this narrative for something or for a specific agenda or just because I believe in it? That's why sometimes I reject some assignments because it's temporary, you know, and I don't feel it. Like, okay, I will be in a temporary place doing something editor tells me about, but this is not the full reality. You need to spend some time on that topic and no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to put myself in that situation. But yeah, I think it's growing with time. But I think just being honest with yourself. And again, like I feel media literacy, but also people critiquing and asking questions. It's something so important. Like I remember I had a lot of questions from World Press Photo about resources and about from where or how I got these informations. And I was like, it's really nice that there is people doing all of this research to make sure what you do is, you know, have authenticity or a resource. But I think we should have it more, you know. We don't publish just like that. And sometimes like you do a narrative, but when you are a little bit famous, you find everyone trusts you. But why you trust me? But maybe I'm just creating that narrative. It's just illusion, you know. So I think no matter who you are, it's always a question that we should follow and investigate and make sure that there is principles and values in what we do.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times the idea of asking questions and asking maybe potentially difficult questions or complicated questions isn't always very welcomed. You know, it can be very difficult. And maybe that's partly how we ask the questions, making sure that we're asking questions in a non-accusatory way. But also I think, it's about being quite vulnerable when we're asked those questions and be like, yeah, actually, this is how I did it. Or, and being willing to share and also do that self-reflection. I don't know. Does that resonate?
Yeah, of course. I think like people like you, what you are doing currently is so important, because again, if you are vulnerable, if you are not afraid of anything, why you don't share, your process, Again, we are not angels. We make mistakes, definitely. But why not sharing those mistakes so others could learn, the new generations, the next generation? So I feel like it's like a system. It's not only about photographers. It's not only about editors. It's not only about the magazine or publishing houses. It's also about people like you and people investigating and people asking questions and interviewing. And I think I saw like a model with Friedrichsen before he wanted to propose about, four corners and ethical ways of showing, your stories. And I think it was really interesting, because we should find always ways to investigate. And I think if the photographer or the photojournalist and whatever, he should accept that. Because if you are not afraid of what you do, so again, like you will be vulnerable, you will be honest, you will not hide anything. And I think it will also be for the people who maybe make mistakes, like, okay, you will be always curious about, no, I should put rules in my mind when I'm navigating, when I'm photographing people. I should follow specific ethics when I'm creating any kind of project, which I feel it's important, to be honest.
And I guess in the spirit of learning, do you have any sort of examples of any ethical dilemmas that you have encountered and maybe how you've negotiated that?
Okay, I had some things that I created a short documentary movie, and usually it takes time and it takes years. And then I remember like everyone was welcoming what I'm doing and everything was nice, everything was easy, and after I finished the documentary, it took some time. So sometimes people change too, and then you get into this dilemma when someone tells you like, I'm not comfortable of, exist in the movie or in your story. And then if you build like a production and the narrative based on that, and their agreements and everything, it's always a dilemma because sometimes it's not just about one person, it's about the whole group. And if you decided to kill it, it's not only affecting that person, but also it's going to affect everyone who participated in your narrative. So I think I had this dilemma at one of my short documentary. I hadn't make it public, to be honest, because I was afraid. He was like, back then he was like 15 years old. And I know that like his family was agreeing on everything, but I felt like I can publish it and I will be satisfied because it's not just about him in the movie, it's also other people. But also I was afraid because he's changing in that age a lot, and I was afraid it would affect him mentally somehow. So this dilemma is difficult, and some ethical dilemmas, I think it's so difficult to make a decision. Like some people told me, again, it's not about him, and maybe he's just young, he doesn't understand now, but he agreed in the beginning, and you invested in that movie, and other people invested because they believe in these stories, and it will help the community. And it's not fair just to kill it, and other people will be affected. So you should go for it. And other people say, but if just one person got hurted, you will feel sad about it, and all of this makes it feeling. So I think it's difficult, and maybe both decisions could be right. You never know. But I think I decided, at least for now, just to keep it aside, and maybe when he grew a little bit, maybe his mind will be changing again, and then it could have a chance. But this is what I faced.
That's a really good example, because that is really complicated. And I guess it also makes me want to ask, what have you found are the differences between working in film and working with photography, especially in terms of ethics?
I think, like with films, it gives you more chance to again, like more layers, like sound. You have movement, images, so it's kind of you play more. But again, the idea of playing, it's very big, because again, how much do you play? How much room do you have to play? And when you interview people, yes, you have a chance. But again, when you go to the edit room, it's also difficult because, again, you choose to hide things. You choose to make things pretty, in order to make audience, when they are perceiving the narrative, their focus will be, with one line, for example. And I think it's based on your intentions, because you cannot film everything and you cannot show everything. But I think it gives you definitely more room than photography, because you have the sound. People can sense if the people are honest about what they are saying, or it's just like being forced to interview or to speak. And I think it gives me more room to express myself. And yeah, it's good. But I believe more now in multimedia, more than just sound and photograph, like video, archives, documents, whatever I can find. People can participate in the narrative by any way, like writing, drawing, everything could add a different layer that will make you close to reality. I think I believe in that more.
When you started out in photography or multimedia or filmmaking, what are the things that you wish that you had known?
I think I'm happy with my process, to be honest, when I'm thinking with you right now, because when I started as a street photography, it's not like you're thinking about specific process to produce or to create. It's just you wake up, you take your camera, you go on the streets, and it's like a fisherman. You're just looking for your fish, And again, there is no expectations, which I feel now that process had given me a freedom in expressing, because I was just walking on the streets, meeting people, talking randomly. But now when you are creating a narrative structure, when you're creating a long-term project, usually that process comes and I need to make a research, I need to investigate, I need to go and do these specific frames, or you think about, so sometimes you feel you lose this part of, how you call it, spontaneous, being free.
Yeah, spontaneity.
In what you create. Yes. And I feel from each stage, because I did that, I started photography when I was 14 years old. Now I'm 28. So I feel every stage was really crucial to what I'm doing. But now I feel I'm trying to mix everything. I go, I immerse myself, I have my camera like a street photographer. If an honest moment happened from an honest interaction, I took it immediately. Yeah, I'm trying to exist as much as I can for these moments. But sometimes when I'm creating a portrait that's going to be meaningful for someone or for the story, I invest, So I'm trying to take a part of each period I have gone through. But ethics is now, I feel it's also important. If I'm teaching, I think it's a very important aspect I draw attention to. You should be aware of that. You are not dealing with subjects. They are humans. Don't take something and run, give people time, respect, engage. And I think it's important, because sometimes I see people now photographing and they don't care. They just feel I own the person I'm photographing, which is, it's sad,
I guess, how do you see ethics of street photography, for example? Because I think that's a question, that comes up a lot, that a lot of the things when we talk about, especially on the podcast, ethics in photography, we're talking about often long-term projects, or there's more emphasis sometimes put on long-term projects because, you can talk about the relationships we build, or we can talk about the research that we do, or the time that we invest. But all of those things are really different, right, with street photography. So how do you see the ethics of street photography, or what about your practice of street photography makes it ethical to you?
I think as a street photographer, it was very difficult because, for example, if you are photographing with a 28 millimeter or 35 and you have a lot of people in your frame, sometimes it's difficult to ask everyone for a consent, or to tell them, I make pictures, because also it's a public place. So I feel you should be in peace with that. Okay, there is a lot of people, it's a public place, you are not almost harming anyone. But I feel if there is a specific scenario or scene happen in the streets, you should be very careful on what you are writing if you are aware of the situation. Because again, if people got to see your image and the caption, I think it's a responsibility. But usually I see street photography, it's more of a fun medium, or a fun category, it's you see the culture, you see the identity, you see buildings, architectures, and all of these mixes together. But sometimes I don't feel it's too serious. And the ethics in it, again, it's something personal. Like if someone, for example, told you like I'm not comfortable of being in your photograph, and again, it's like if you feel like the picture is about him or about her, you should respect that and delete it immediately. I think I got that a lot when I was photographing, and someone comes to me and say like, I'm not comfortable, and then I show him the picture. I was like, okay, this is like a lot of people, it's not about you. And then people, when they see it, it's just like, okay, it's fine, you can use it. And then when it's just about someone and he said like, I don't like, I have to delete it, because again, it's the right to choose. But I think it's not complicated in street photography, actually.
It's less complicated than long term?
Yeah, I feel it's less complicated. But also, I can tell you scenarios that happen based on my culture that could be different from other culture, which, for example, sometimes, in religions, maybe Christian people or Christian girl met a Muslim man, and maybe her family doesn't want that to happen, or the opposite, whatever, And then if you are a street photographer and maybe you see a couple like, in the street holding hands and you saw a beautiful scene, and then you photograph something like that, and then there is a situation I witnessed when a photographer, he posted that picture, and then, her family, somehow, and then they asked it, one of her family asked it about, please delete the picture because it could create a danger for her, and for everyone. And then that photographer was not respectful, and he said like, no, it's my picture and I'm not delete it. Until I heard like there was a big issue to her, with her family. And I think sometimes it depends on your culture. You should also respect, maybe you never know like what could happen, But also again, like people always like will have the right, if they say like, please delete my picture, I'm not comfortable, I think you should respect that. Because your picture will not be enough if they got mental damage or physical damage because of you as a photographer. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's such a good point, that you don't, especially with street photography, when you're not having these conversations with people, you don't know what their risks could be. And that was something that came up when I was doing a workshop here in Northern Ireland and talking about children who are in care, maybe in foster care or something, and maybe their birth parents aren't supposed to know where they are, so it's these considerations that you wouldn't know unless you asked, and I think that that's always quite interesting and something that we don't always think about. We sort of think, oh, well, what's the risk? There's no, the scene is, like you said, it could be a beautiful scene with just a couple holding hands, which feels really safe, but it doesn't mean it's safe for everybody. I think that's a really good point.
I believe like I just broke that once in one of my projects, which was like about Sufism and people meditating and reflecting on nature. And I didn't ask them to take a picture because I didn't want to break, that feeling of they are looking at the sky, or, they are closing their eyes and, sitting in the mountains. And I was like, what I did is I was taking a picture without them noticing me, because this was the idea of the project. But later, after like I see that they are free from what they're doing, I was just going and showing them like, I got this picture and I'm doing that, and are you comfortable? And some people, like mostly they said it's fine. And then when someone says like, no, I don't feel comfortable, I delete it. But but even if you're gonna break the rules, you have to break it. But also, again, is it about like respecting, or is it about just you having the picture? Because I think sometimes we get teachings, especially in photojournalism, that it's all about the picture. It's your responsibility, it's your duty. And then you find people in funerals or like in a sensitive situation, and then I have to make it for the magazine. Or no, just if the family is not comfortable, don't do it, Like if the magazine are paying you to do that, but there is some topics that we should be like, no, people have freedom to say no. And maybe they're going to look at this picture, for example, in the magazine or the news, and they're going to remember this sad moment forever because of you. So again, like we should be aware of that. Not everything a publication or a newspaper asks, it's true, Because usually a lot of photo editors are not aware of your environment, of the situation, but they just think about what they will write, and also everyone think about his legacy, and sometimes it's not ethical, It's, yeah.
You mentioned earlier how you sometimes turn down certain clients if it's a project that you feel like you don't maybe have a connection with or have something to say about. And you're also mentioning there a lot of like sort of the cultural considerations of, have this awareness that we have to develop as photographers about where we are. And you also mentioned about how sometimes photo editors or the commissioners aren't going to be aware of a lot of those things. So I was wondering if you could maybe say something about how do you negotiate that? Or have you been in situations where you felt like you have to be like maybe a cultural translator and you have to sort of renegotiate what the expectation is or what the brief is?
I remember a situation. I'm not sure if I should say the name of the magazine, but it's a big magazine, and I was asking them about publishing my first project because all like the outcome or the income of the project, like the money, I was giving it to the families and help them with the aid and all of these things. And I said like the exposure would be good for the project and the money and everything. And then the editor, his response was like, "But I remember we published like 2 years the same project about cement in somewhere else." And I was like, "Yeah, so?" And I was like, "No, but our audience will be bored of seeing almost the same thing again." And I was like, first, it's not like my story. Secondly, if you say like part of your job or your responsibility is to promote photographers or international photographers, and their stories and their narrative. So is it for you about being honest about what you do or just about your audience because they are paying to the magazine? So sometimes you find, depending on the place or the news agency, it's about your audience, it's about who pay to buy it or to subscribe to the news. And sometimes this affects actually your narrative. And I think it's you to choose if you need to compromise, because sometimes you feel like someone is pushing you towards a specific things to do. And sometimes, of course, like you find their captions is not as, the reality. And then, no, but it's not, what I witnessed. And I think it's a process you learn with time. You don't compromise too much. Of course, you respect and you talk and you discuss. But I think for photo editors and news agency, it's sometimes we give them values as photographer because everyone needs that exposure, needs his stories and his project to be seen. But we forget that sometimes these big news agencies and newspapers, also serve their own agenda sometimes, and they will not care about exactly your narrative. And I think also it's changing now a little bit, because we used to have like a parachuting photographer come to your community and making a stories that when you look at it, it's not true, but I think it depends really on the place and on the photo editor you work with. But also we are giving them the value, which is sad, because now again, like with the activities that was happening in the last conflict, when you look at the conflicts that happen, it's not a conflict like the genocides that is happening in Gaza, but also the wars that is happening in Ukraine. You look at the post news and you will find it's different, manipulating words and manipulating, the news, and then it's not fair, So when we speak about ethics of photojournalism, and we say like everyone is equal, then when it comes to reality, it's not like that. It will be always like humans who decide what's important, what's not, what to publish, what's not, and it's not really fixed. I'm sure there is a lot of other people, I'm really sure, doing a great work, respecting others, but we should always look for those and give them the value.
I think that's a great point, right? That like photo editors are people too. Like none of us are objective and none of us sort of are coming at this with a full picture necessarily. So no, I think that's a really good point. Is there anything that I should have asked you but didn't?
No, but I think you said something nice about taking pictures. And I think like there's some words sometimes we use. It's not like you said it, but I mean like they use it in the industry and I feel like I want to take something, But sometimes I feel like we need to change these perceptions, like making picture maybe, like creating a narrative, but also how we create, how we define creating or making a narrative, I think media literacy, it's important, Also, it should be embedded in what we do in the whole system, and we should educate people. But I believe like a lot of governments will never allow that, because it's like teaching audience or educating them about how to perceive the photographs, how to also be aware of what's happening. Because now I talk to some international friends, and then everyone has a different opinion based on his like source of news, I'm like, why you trust the news 100%? I'm here, I'm telling you, I'm in the situation, I'm the one who's living it. So again, I feel like educating people that also what we do is not showing reality 100%. At the end of the day, sometimes it could be a perspective, it could be something very subjective, not objective. So I feel media literacy, it's so important, like for audience, for everyone actually. It should be embedded in the education. And if people are aware of that, I think also who creates a story will be also, knows that people would get it, You should be aware of ethics, you should follow it.
I think that's a great point. Absolutely. I mean, all of that I think is super important. And I think you're completely right that, the more media literacy, the more aware we are of who's making the images that we're seeing. But also, I think you're spot on that that's always going to be a challenge to power, when we are able to think really critically about the images we consume. So it's always a challenge to governments, I think. The last question that I like to ask everyone before we end this podcast is, what does photography ethics mean to you?
I think ethics is to let your ego, go, and then think about, like, don't separate what you do, from who you are. Like, if you're really a good person, it will be reflected in your work immediately. If you are thinking about ethics and manners and values and respecting people, it will be immediately in your work. And actually, everything you do in your life, we should not separate them. And I feel ethics, to me, is always reflecting on what I'm doing, every step, asking those questions in each project I'm going to make, but also like milestones and getting back to that, why I'm doing it, for whom, what is it about, and all of these questions that is very difficult and very hard to go through. But I believe like we should always put them in front of our eyes every day, why we are doing this. Because we also change with time. And sometimes, having a lot of exposure could change you because you find all of these opportunities that sometimes you feel like you don't need to miss something. But again, it's not about missing, it's about always doing the right thing for you and what you believe in. And if you didn't find, for example, people also respecting those values or the values you believe in, just walk away, just because again, if someone really respect you and respect your culture and respect your values, he will really invest in you, but just to compromise too much, just to publish your work, I think it's, you are hurting yourself, but also hurting your protagonist somehow. And I feel we will reach to a point where we will regret that. I see it that way.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Photo Ethics Podcast. The aim of this podcast is to share new insights about photography ethics with others. So if you heard something you liked, please share this podcast with someone who would appreciate it. You can also rate and review us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Join me next week when we hear from Daniel Etter on Truth in Fiction. In each episode of the podcast, we ask our guests, what does photography ethics mean to you? This is a question that everyone in the photography industry should be able to answer. That's why the Photography Ethics Center is asking you, our listeners, to commit to writing and publishing your own statement of ethics. Visit www.photoethics.org/ethics to learn more and to take the pledge committing to ethical transparency, accountability, and awareness. That's www.photoethics.org/ethics.